Hey there, Eduardo from Meta here, and today I'm going to talk about exams, which are by far the most common and widespread method that we use in education to measure, to assess learning. Exams are normally just a bunch of questions bundled up together, in which question you have multiple possible answers, but only one is correct, and in the end you will be graded, you will be assessed for the amount of right choices you've chosen. Well, and while I don't think that method is useless, I also don't think it does its job efficiently. I mean, it doesn't measure learning efficiently. And I say that because even if you have learned the subject which the exam is about, you may still get a bad grade. And there are multiple different ways in which you can do that. If you are in a bad day, if you're a little bit distracted, if you misread a couple questions, boom, bad grade. If you don't remember a specific fact or information that few questions require, bam, bad grade. If you spend too much time in a few more challenging questions and end up not finishing the exam, boom, bad grade. So there are lots of different things that can affect your grade and have nothing to do with learning. But if that was the problem about exams, there wouldn't be no problem at all. This is actually just a minor issue. Other thing that is quite possible is to have good grades without learning. And I'm not talking about here the luck aspect in which you could, in theory, guess all the correct answers by chance. I'm talking about something that every procrastinator student is master at, and I count myself amongst them, and in fact the vast majority of students are procrastinators. What I'm talking about here is the practice, the habit of studying only 1 week before, only 1 day before, and sometimes even few hours before an exam, and then forgetting everything 1 or 2 weeks later. The thing is, one of the definitions of learning is the transformation of short-term memory into long-term memory, and that requires some sort of repetition. So if you study a lot about the content but only once, you will eventually forget. You have to keep accessing this content on and off here and there for you to really learn and remember when you have to. But let's be honest here. I know what some of you may be thinking. You may be thinking that, okay, you got what I'm saying, right? You understand what I'm saying, but my examples were not really great, were they? I mean, everything I've said is just students' fault. Because in theory, a student could study every day, so you would have the repetition required for learning. And you may even make a few mistakes here and there on a few exams, but overall you will get good grades. And over time, these other skills and other factors that have influence over your grades, you will be eventually getting slowly better at them, and your grades would improve as well. That's valid, okay, but there are two factors that must definitely be taken into account here. One of them is that the things, the subjects, the content that the students are being pretty much forced to learn at school are not interesting to them. They do not care about the content. And worst of all, by far, the content is not useful to them. It's not relevant to their lives, it's not applicable to their lives. So now it makes much more sense to memorize instead of learn. You won't have any issue forgetting all this stuff later because you won't use them apart from the exam. The only time that you ever have to remember this content is during the exam. And that gets even worse when combined with the other factor that must be taken into account, which is the sheer obscene volume of content that students have to learn at school. It's virtually impossible to actually learn everything that it's expected to learn. And when you combine these factors, the whole educational system crumbles. And I get it. It's a quite bold claim, a quite strong one, but let me explain that. The whole purpose of measuring learning is to improve it. That's the whole point of measuring anything, really. So only by assessing learning, we as educators will know if the methods that we are using, the practices that we are having, are being effective or not, if we need to change something, if there are particular students struggling or in need of an extra help. That's the whole point of assessing learning, is to improve it. But, and that's the main point of this video. So the combination of this ineffective method for assessing learning with uninteresting and useless content just shifts the whole purpose of exams. Now the focus of education is not learning anymore. It's getting good grades. You shifted the focus of education. Learning is secondary to grades right now. Ask any student, they don't want to learn, they want to get good grades, they want not to flunk, with few rare exceptions. And you may argue that that's a problem on the student's mindset. The students view education this way. But they are not the only ones to blame. The schools themselves, they market their services this way. Parent, bring your children to us, because last year we put 50 students into the best universities of the country. But how do you do that? How do you put a student into a university, make him get good grades on a particular exam, which is the vestibular? The schools themselves care much more about your results on an exam, your results on the vestibular, than your learning. And the schools only market their services like that because their customers, which are the parents, because students are the end users, they are going to use the service the school provides, but the one who pays, the customer of the schools, are the parents. The parents themselves are much more interested in getting their kids into universities than in their learning. So schools do that because it sells. And you're starting to see that this is a very broad issue. It's really a systemic problem. Students, parents, schools are to hold accountable for, but also the government. Because it's the government, it's the politics that says that a student in the 8th grade has to learn X, Y, and Z, and the schools have to abide to that. That is just complete absurd. Politics says what has to be learned, schools have to abide to that, and now learning is not important anymore. Now you have to get good grades, good results, but not necessarily learning. And where is the focus of education, which, by the way, should be learning? Where is it? Nowhere to be found. No wonder our whole educational system is really falling apart. And another major issue regarding exams is that even though they are not very efficient at assessing learning, students think they are. Which means that when a student gets a bad grade in math, for example, and then gets another bad grade, what he will think is, okay, I'm not good at math. Some people are good at math, some people aren't. I just happen to be one of the ones that aren't. And you've just created a barrier for learning right there. And it's in the student's mind. The student will have much more trouble with math at the point that he created that belief in his mind that he's not very good at math, math is boring, he's not good with numbers, and that was created by exams. He may have bad grades because he didn't adapt very well to the teacher's teaching method, but he thinks it's because of him, it's his fault. And well, I have a lot to talk about it. It's something that really pisses me off, but it's also something that gave me my purpose. It's the reason why all this trouble with education is the reason why it led me to create Beta. So I'm also grateful for those problems in a way. Okay, but the point of the video was to give my take, my perspective on this whole issue. I realized that I didn't propose any solutions, I didn't give any alternatives, but they exist. In fact, some of these alternatives, I myself used them to create Beta's English methodology of teaching English. And I intend to talk about them in other videos, okay? And I also realized that I made a few claims that I didn't back up with data, with statistics, and with studies. But since it would give me a lot of work, a lot of extra work, and since it's kind of my view on this problem, I didn't really feel it was necessary to, back up my claims. I would like to hear from you. Comment if you agree with me, if you've had experiences that I think in a way we all can relate to what I've said, but give personal experiences. I will read all the comments. And just one more thing that really pisses me off, that I'm going to finish the video with it, just for, some thought, is Frederick J. Kelly, which is the man that invented the current model of assessing learning, which is this multiple answer exams. He himself said that this method was too crude to be used and therefore should be abandoned. And you know how long ago he said that? More than 100 years ago. He created this method to assess learning of recruits to fight the World War I. I mean, really? How much the world have changed in 100 years and we still teach the same way and we still assess learning the same way? God, that just pisses me off so much. See you next video.